Thank you. It's really difficult to introduce you because you seem to have many different lives. So I would just like to say that you are working at the National Center for Scientific Research in France, and you dedicated to the Asian Research Center. And we'll be very happy to hear your keynote presentation about Japanese wood and carpentry. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and wood lovers. It's my great pleasure to present the Japanese wood and seen from the point of view of the carpenters and the wood they use. Okay, so I will present in 4 chapters the four types of carpenters. They all use different wood species. They all take a different point of view. But first I will explain why the wood is so important in Japan. And it was exhibited as a national treasure from the Meiji period. I explain. So it was presented in world exhibitions. So the first exhibition Japan took part as a nation was in Vienna in 1873. And yes, they brought wood. And I mean, Japan entered the world scene. And how did they present themselves? At first, by wood. I mean, which country presents its wood? And of course, other things too. But it showed 133 wood samples and logs. And then 3 years later was the exhibition in Philadelphia, the World Exhibition, and they presented a book. This Yuyo Mokusai Shoran, a big guide. I have it here. I open it so you can see there are 100 important timber tree species which are presented in this little book. I will come to it during the exhibition. I will exposal. I will show this inner side. 2 years later, in 78, in Paris, there was another world exhibition, and they showed the same book. It was published in Japan by the Japanese government. Here you have the picture, and I call it a handbook. It means quick guide. If you translate these 2 words, it's a kind of quick guide, and it has a size of about 18 centimeters, which is the size of the hand. You see, the book has the size of a hand, so I call it a handbook. And yes, so here you have an inner view. I show the Japanese cedar on the left side, is the sugi, and the Japanese cypress on the right side, the hinoki. And these 2 species are the most important, are very important in Japan. There's 2 conifers, and often if you say cedar or cypress, many people mix it up. So you have here left the cedar and right the cypress. I also show one of the broadleaves. This is also famous in Japan, is the Japanese zelkoba. They have the cross section on top and the longitudinal section on the bottom. I start with the miyadaiku, the temple and shrine carpenters. Then they use a major use of the hinoki cypress and its substitutes. I start with the Kofokuji Temple in Nara and the lecture hall, which had to be reconstructed after fire many years ago. And it was accomplished in 2003. So they had to use, what did they use instead of hinoki cypress? The chief carpenter went to Taiwan, and they selected the Taiwan hinoki or the Beni hinoki. These are two types of cypresses from Taiwan. Very huge timbers. The chief carpenter or Torio went to the mountain and selected the timbers on site. And yeah, and this is jetzt now the next project, restoration project, reconstruction project. This is the Japanese, the Heiju Palace in Nara, which was absolutely didn't exist. So it had to be reconstructed from beginning. And from 2001, they started it. And 2010, this building was reconstructed. And what did they do to get this large timber? They bundled together the pillars. You see them here, that they have been bundled together in order to create this great pillars. Next step for first I explained that Kyoto, which you see on the left side, you see a hinoki cypress, was completely built by mostly with hinoki cypress, but then there were these civil wars in the 15th century, and you still see the traces of the fighting on that pillar, so therefore I selected it. And then they could change to other tree species, which is here the keiki, Japanese tselkova. And I show you why they could change to it. They couldn't do it before because, as you see here, 15th century in the center, there was the Civil War, the Onin Wars. And before that, on the left side, left top, you see conversion was done, the cutting was done by splitting. So no need of the saw. But then they needed to use other tree species, here the tselkova, and so they let the Chinese oga, or used by two persons, this and they used this, voila. Okay, longitudinal saw for either pine or keiki. Voila. So then the 16th century was the introduction of the white blade rib saw. You know that one, you have seen it sometimes. It's very special. And it can be used by just one person. So they cut the timber with this white blade rib saw and with this beautiful hokusai wood block print. Yes. This technique is hardly used anymore, but there is some very, very rare craftsmen who can still make use of it, like this person from Nara. His name is Hayashi. He uses this saw. Next step, reconstruction was the central hall of the Kofokuji Temple in Nara, and they went as far as Africa to find this huge timber. They used Afzelia or Dusye, in Japanese Apa or Africa keiki, and they could get this large timber and it was, the timber was finished by a spearhead plane or yarigana. And there's no more timber. So the question is, what are they doing next? Yeah, and we go to the next chapter. And this is the precious, also the Sukiya Daiku, the carpenters for refined tea houses, and they make use of precious Japanese wood, the meiboku. Here's the example of two tea houses next to each other. There's a small tea house on the left side and a bigger tea house on the right side. Is in Kyoto, at the Hashimoto Kansetsu Garden and Museum. And these two tea houses, and I'm explaining from those example from these two tea houses. Here the little house, the Keijaku-an, it has a little crawl-through entrance, and especially also I want to draw your attention to the suspended sliding storm shutter, which is made from tuya standisi, or netsuko in Japanese. Yeah, you have a closer view, and here this little handbook view. Also, there you see the Tuiopsis lativirens as a name. This is the ancient tree names. And so in the Meiji period. But nowadays, the accepted name is Tuya standishi. We go back to this little tea house on the left side is the Keijaku-an, and this alcove pillar, these are the alcoves pillar, is made from an old tselkaowa, which was taken from the Todaiji Temple, which is in Nara. It was founded in 738 and several times reconstructed. So there's ancient timber, and this is also in the tea ceremony. They make the use of very symbolic timber, and like this one. Yeah, you have a closer view. You see these black traces. This is from a fire because the tea houses burned down about 10 years ago and were reconstructed. Yes, and therefore I also got to know which wood species were used, because I also was in contact with the carpenters who reconstructed those tea houses. But other materials I used, like here, the hinoki bark or bamboo used. The bigger tea room makes here use also this alcove pillar, but it uses the pine, the red pine, with bark. Then this waiting area is also in the same garden. This is as a so-called machiai, and it was used with common reed as a roof, and it is an ancient it represents an ancient building. Such a building is in early historical periods used. What they also use this technique is, no, I have to go back. Yes, is the chona or adze technique, where this, and in French we call it herminette. And to use this ancient technique is used also in tea houses. Then very famous construction is an imperial villa, the Katsurari-kyu, very famous. It is often an inspiration for present carpenters. They get inspired from this type of building. And I give a big few. These are 13 wood species which were used in this Katsurari-kyu building. And these are all conifers besides two, a broadleaf, which is the horse chestnut and the Japanese chestnut. And the others are all kinds of conifer species. Interesting also of the Katsurari-kyu is this rustic gate. This was exclusively used by the imperial family. And the posts are made from Chinese cork oak or Quercus variabilis, and this expressive bark enhances the rusticity, and this in an imperial residence, such a rustic building gate. With a little closer view, it's very rustic. And this is what is in the tea ceremony, is this very refined rusticity. In the following chapters, these are the joiners of doors, windows, and screen, the so-called tatakuya. And what is very important here is the use of the straight grain. You see here the straight grain, and this is very much used, as you will see in the next photo. I see here there's biobo frames or biobo and frames that and from left to right you have 3 broadleaves, and on the right side the 3 conifers that they are used for these frames. As you see here, these frames, of course they are lacquered here, but they can also be used by that you see the wood grain. Yeah, and this here you have the sliding door, and the you see this is an art object. So what do they do for art objects? They use, of course, they use Japanese cedar, but they use the sapwood, the inner part of the outer part of the wood. And because it protects these paintings, which no resin comes out. And it also has this little sliding door, has an inserted board made of magnolia for the hand pulls. A closer view. And yeah, what is sapwood? This is the very outer part of the wood. And that was used, this is used for the inner lattice of sliding screens or folding screens. I mean, this is, here you have a folding screen. This is, of course, these are artworks that need to be protected as much as possible. And here I show, this is the hardwood. This is a sliding door, a paper covered sliding door or shoji made from the hardwood of Japanese cedar sugi. Here from the little handbook, and the sapwood and the hardwood are 2 separate entries. I mean, when I was myself a cabinet maker, a craftsman, or woman, when I started woodworking, the first thing which astonished me, why do they cut out this outer part? And now I know it's the sapwood which was cut out, but it has also been useful for these screens. Here is another partition screen, which was exhibited at the World Exhibition. It was recently discovered in the Decorative Arts Museum in Paris, and it is made from black persimmon. It was restored. It was restored by a restorer of the museum, and also one Japanese tatakuya. You see here, restored and not restored. This is the wood we organized from Japan, Japanese kurogaki, this black persimmon. Also in the handbook on the right side, you have normal persimmon, and on the left side, this black persimmon. It's the same tree, but some trees show this black part, which is then used in crafts. I come to the fourth chapter, which is the minka. These general carpenters, they use it for mountain dwellings, farmhouses, or townhouses. I will present them in this order. We start here with a mountain dwelling from Kaida village in the Kiso district in Nagano prefecture, which was presented in Paris. So it was brought to Paris by the ethnologist Jan Kobi, and it is now presented in a garden in Paris. Here is the Kaida Mura, is in the Nagano prefecture. And what I show here is the shingles are made from Sawara cypress. Also, so that comes also from the Kiso area. And then this brings me to the 5 precious trees of the Kiso area of Kiso go boku. And this is on the very left side, the Hinoki cypress. Then here is the Sawara cypress, which is a little bit rougher. And then the Hiba arborvitae and Japanese tuya, we already talked about that. And the very right side, the umbrella pine, the famous umbrella pine, Sciatopitis verticillata, which only grows in Japan and is one species, one genus, one family. The other is this Noka, this farmhouse, Kamiseya farmhouse in the village in the mountainous area of Tango Peninsula, which you see here on the top. This building was being destroyed, and so the Kyoto University was allowed to get samples to do the wood identification. So the main pillars and beams are conifers. The pegs, little pegs, were made from a very solid Japanese evergreen oak, and the roof rafters were from secondary forest trees. Here you have an inner view. They make use of chestnut or hornbeam or oak and many wood from the secondary forest or satoyama. The last is the Kyoto townhouse. pillars are made from sugi or Japanese or hinoki. The beams with straight beams are made from sugi again. And curved beams, are, like here, are made from pine. Then since the 1920s, they use imported timber like Douglas fir, or Oregon pine, but then, these final remarks, the temple then were in search of timber tree large enough to satisfy their requirements. As for large timber, they went as far as Cameroon. The carpenter for tea houses and joiner of doors and screens still find their timber in Japan, but they also experience shortages due to pine illness or the interdiction of certain wood like yakusugi from the Yakushima island. The general carpenter makes use of local timber and the countryside or uses imported timber. Also, there's a risk of termites and harmful chemicals. A final positive outlook fills us with hope. There's a new fashion of young people wishing to make a difference by opening restaurants or guest houses in traditional houses or setting up their life in the countryside for agriculture. Woodworking is also a fascinating and fulfilling alternative to a company life in the city, to accompany life in the city. I thank you for your attention, and for deeper knowledge, also for more information, I refer you to the right book. This is the last, my new book is on this presentation. Or if you want more technical information, I refer to my first book. So, and this with the carpenters, they have who have a ceremony the 2nd of January each year, and for wishing a safe and successful new year. And I hope it brings us to a full presentation of the World Wood Day. Thank you very much. If you have questions.
Thank you very much for this really nice presentation. I can see lots of comments saying, thank you very much. It's a very informative presentation. I think that was the case. I really liked to know about the large diversity of Japanese timber and their uses depending on where you are or who you are building for. And it's also very interesting to see the use of timber with bark, because it's not that usual. And also the dedicated uses for sapwood, which is sometimes excluded from the construction or from the objects. So yeah, we've got lots of people saying excellent, really nice, all the materials, presentations lovely. So we don't have a specific question, but may I ask one? I would like to know, you mentioned the use of a Cameroon African timber, the doucier. Are there many examples of imported wood from Africa in Japan, or is it very rare?
Yeah, it is used as much as it is in China, but of course this is more in the modern. But no, it's in fact I don't know exactly. I have in my former book I write down which wood species I used for import, but anyway, I don't get the timber, the Afzelia anymore from Cameroon. This is now stopped. And yes, they get also many imported timber from all parts of the world, I mean that I know that the Chinese go to Africa and get a lot of timber, and so I'm sure that they all also go, but it is more and more restricted. Heavily there are CITES which prohibits the use of timber. But I know that, and there's also logging, so prohibited logging is also done. I know that, yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you. We've got one question. Is it rare to see timber in use with bark nowadays, or is it still in use?
It is specially used in the tea ceremony. Yes. Oh yes. Or they use the bark for walls and wall work.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. It is a little bit used, but this is very special for the tea ceremony.
Oh, thank you very much. That's interesting because barkers are sometimes discarded. Oh, we've got one question.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, not questions, just a comment that nowadays in Japan, to use the imported timbers for the national treasures is not recommended.
Okay.
Yeah, previously, some of the items were used to make construction, particularly the national treasures. However, to keep the nationality, nowadays, they recommend if possible, the native species. This is just kind of information. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this comment. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Yeah, no, I just want to add that anyway, the foreign timber also is more prone to insect attacks, because these common timbers in the country, it is already there is some harmony between the common timber, their own timbers, and the imported that just doesn't fit to the country. I mean, I think maybe I'm too much Japanese now.
Actually,
that's really good.
The government has published the manuals. If you reconstruct it, particularly shrine and so on, please try to employ the native species, not just imported nowadays. Just a comment, yeah? Okay, good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the comments, the presentation, and the question. That was really lovely. And we're going to move on to the next presentation. Again, thanks very much.